I'm taking it one day at a time, but my mind is years ahead.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me as always on Twitter at redrock_bball. Today we're going to be looking at the Phoenix Suns in their season preview, and to talk about the Phoenix Suns I am joined by one of the hosts of the Locked On Suns podcast, and that is Brendon Kleen. Brendon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Excited to get things started with basketball again.
It's good to have you on. Good to talk about the Phoenix Suns, a team with plenty for us to talk about from a fantasy point of view. So, Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
All right, let's start by talking about these Phoenix Suns, Brendon, and we'll go with the projected record to start things off again. Just another of the Locked On hosts, just marginally higher on the team than what Vegas is. Vegas has the team projected at 28.5, that's what their total is. You've gone at 30 and 52, so just marginally above, but a significant improvement on what this team was able to do last season. Obviously, the team clearly wanted to lose last year. They wanted to get that number one pick. They've got it, and it does appear that there is going to be more of a focus on winning this season. So is that where you're getting that significant improvement on for the record for this Suns team?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a matter of the effort of putting the right players on the court to win games again, and that was obvious from their not addressing certain positions in the summer of 2017, sitting players due to injury, and really just not making an effort really for the last 40 games or more. So yeah, I think I'm just the effort put into putting the right guys on the court together. Obviously, there's a lot more talent this year as well. I just think they'll improve quite a bit, just all things considered.
I think an improvement's almost guaranteed. Devin Booker's been pretty publicly stating that he wants to win. He wants to try and push for the playoffs, and that's clearly an unrealistic expectation, in my opinion. And you seem to think that way with the projected wins of 30. But making those moves, a one-year signing for Trevor Ariza, bringing these guys in to try and develop and start to get that direction moving in the upwards direction rather than where it was, and that was really trying to tank to get themselves pretty strong draft picks, and that's what they got in the last 2 years with pick 1, and then the year before pick 4 with Josh Jackson, and the year before that with pick 4 as well with Dragan Bender. Let's go to the leading scorer on this team. I don't think anyone would have any discussion or any debate that it is going to be Devin Booker. He did average at just a shade under 25 points per game last season, 4.5 rebounds and 4.7 assists. Almost a steal, and he did really bump his efficiency up to a true shooting of 56, which is right on that league average number. Now, when we look at what Booker can do this year, the minutes are going to be there. I think he's going to play more than the 54 games. You talked about injury, and I use that term very loosely. He did have somewhat of a thumb problem, but I reckon he could have come back for probably the last 10, 15 games, but there was the decision made for him not to do that. But I guess the question I'll ask you here, Brendon, is the usage that he put up last season was pretty significant, 31%, with Deandre Ayton around, with Trevor Ariza there, with perhaps we see more of Josh Jackson playing minutes alongside Devin Booker. Do you think that that usage might drop somewhat? But do you think I think this will happen, but do you think that will be offset with an increase in efficiency?
I think that's exactly right. I mean, and to go back to the injury a little bit too, yeah, Booker wanted to play last year too. It wasn't even a matter of himself, taking it easy. It was really the team pushing him there. So I expect you're right with the games played. He's never had injury problems in the first 2 seasons of his career. And to go to the usage part of it all, I think it's kind of the same thing we were talking about with the tanking, where they put themselves in a position where they had to ask Devin Booker to do way more than he was comfortable with and what really he was capable of doing efficiently last year, because they didn't put talent on the court with him. So I think you're exactly right that the usage will probably go down a little bit, and maybe right around where it was in 2016-17, which looking at it now is 28.6%. I think that's reasonable considering he was playing with Eric Bledsoe that season, and he's going to have more of a steady point guard rotation this year, hopefully. And the efficiency, I think, in turn will probably go up. I think playing off the ball will be helpful for him. That role of, knockdown spot up shooter that he filled so beautifully at Kentucky and won the Sixth Man of the Year in the SEC, it never really has materialized. His best performances, 70-point games, and comeback performances, game winners, all that stuff has happened with the ball in his hands for the majority of a game, and I think that will start to change this year. With the offense the team's going to run and just with trying to make a more efficient system that runs through him in smarter ways than just isolating him and, pull-up jumpers and that kind of inefficient stuff that doesn't make a great offense.
He was the 29th ranked player in fantasy last year. His rank on Yahoo at the moment is 24, and I think that's exactly the right spot for him because what I do envisage, even if those shot attempts do drop marginally, and that's what I think. I think you're going to get an offset in efficiency. He got to the line a ton last year and shot the ball really well, 88% from the line on 6 attempts, which is a huge positive in that free throws. But Brendon, one thing I do think that's going to happen with Devin Booker is we're going to see those assist numbers really go up. Over the final 22 games of last season, he saw his assist numbers go to 5.3 per game. He played quite a bit of point guard there, and with the way that the Suns have attacked this offseason, not bringing any point guards outside of Alia Cobo, who they drafted with pick 31 in the NBA draft, but getting wings. You've got Trevor Ariza in there, getting Mikael Bridges, to add to Josh Jackson, to add to TJ Warren. I feel that even if he doesn't start as the point guard, Booker is going to be playing point guard on this team for a big chunk of time, and that is going to see those assist numbers really spike from the 4.7 per game he averaged last season.
I think you're exactly right. And I'll add that while they made it easier on themselves to put those types of versatile lineups that are going to be better space for him to score and make plays for his teammates, while adding a center who can attract attention, and then all those shooters and wings that you mentioned as well, that's all going to make things a lot smoother and easier and more open for him on offense. I would also add that touching on the system part of it as well, with Igor Kokoshkov being hired by the Suns this summer, even if, like you said, he's not necessarily the nominal point guard in a given lineup, the ball is going to be moving so much that it'll finish possessions in his hands more often than not, whether that is, a reversal where he's making a quick play and getting those assists, or scoring and having an easier time doing that as well. I think everything will be just a little bit easier for him. I expect the points and, like you said, the assists to go up quite a bit. Especially on the assist side.
The other thing that I think that holds Booker back, and I think he could be a top 12, top 13 fantasy guy, is the steals, and he just does not generate steals in any sort of volume at all. The last 2 seasons have been his best seasons there at 0.9, but that's really not cutting it. It's a below average number in terms of steals. If he could get that somehow to 1.5, then we're talking about a top 15, top 12 sort of a player. But I think at this point we know his defensive issues. He hasn't shown an ability to do that. So I have real hesitancy in thinking that he can do that. So maybe that puts somewhat of a limit on what his upper level of fantasy value is. Maybe you could look at his numbers as being James Harden-esque. Maybe he could at some point get to 7.5 assists, but Harden blocks 0.8 shots per game. He gets over a steal per game. And they're the things that I just don't think that Booker's going to be able to ever get to. But if those things did come along, then that value could really push up quite high. He just doesn't rebound the ball, he doesn't get the steals, and he doesn't get the block numbers that someone like Harden does. And that's always going to, I guess, put somewhat of a cap, I believe, on his overall fantasy value. But he's still going to be this top 25 guy, probably top 20 guy for many seasons to come. So he is a strong option in that back-end second round type area for this coming season. If we have a look at injuries, we talked about Booker's thumb. TJ Warren has had numerous issues. He had these weird head injuries that weren't concussions, and then the back issues and knee issues. He missed the end of last season as well. I feel like his injury was maybe a little bit more severe than what Booker's was. Is there any update on TJ? Is he ready to go for this preseason?
Yeah, I think he was in a similar boat, a little more serious at the end of last season, but I would say that if they were a playoff contender, he would have been in the lineup then as well. So I don't expect any hiccups heading into camp or preseason or any of that.
Well, this leads us to talk about TJ Warren, who played 33 minutes a night last year. He was the 83rd ranked player and just a shade under 20 points, 5 rebounds, and his usual high efficiency, almost 50% from the field. But of course, doesn't shoot any threes, shot 22% from deep, doesn't really do too much else in terms of steals or assists, and not a strong rebound. And I feel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Brendon, I think that we're not going to see TJ Warren play those 33 minutes per night this season. I think he's probably better suited to a sixth man role. How do you see his playing time go with more from Josh Jackson, with Ariza, and with Mikael Bridges there now as well? Is TJ looking to probably downturn a bit from what he did last season?
I think so. I think it won't be as consistent. I think you could see it's going to be, I think, like a hot hand type of approach for them, especially early in the year. I think you actually might see Warren be the guy closing games and getting the lion's share of minutes early in the season. I think that will change with you would hope the young players taking steps forward. Mikael Bridges is an older rookie, so I think he's going to be in the mix right away. Obviously, Trevor Ariza is the big addition. He's going to want to play and prove himself as he goes into free agency again next summer. So, I mean, it's one of the biggest questions to watch with this team is who ends up starting and who's really playing the most and getting consistent opportunities. But I would imagine that Warren, who was the second option most nights for the team last year, won't be in that position nearly as often, and really we'll see a downturn in shot attempts and minutes as well.
Yeah, I obviously see that happening too. Yahoo's ranked him 110th, lower than last season. I think that even might be marginally too high. And if we're talking about guys who have upside there, I think that his upside in comparison to, say, Bridges or Jackson is lower. I think he'll still probably end up playing more minutes than, say, both of those guys, or maybe not. We'll see what happens with Josh Jackson. But I think he's looking to trend a little bit downwards. And the last guy that we need to talk about injury-wise is Brendon Knight, who missed all of last season with an ACL injury. I think it's safe to assume that he is ready to go. Do you think that he will be the starting point guard on this team?
I think he has to be. I think it's sort of scary to say that, but like you mentioned, they drafted Alia Cobo, number 31 overall, and that's the only other point guard really on this roster. And so they're going to have to start Brendon Knight, and I think that's why you also kind of lean toward the idea that Devin Booker will be the primary playmaker for a lot of time every night, because they can't necessarily trust Akobo as a backup, and they can't necessarily trust Knight with his massive injury that he's coming off. So that is going to be the starting point guard. It's just a matter of where that goes.
His last full healthy season in Phoenix, it was the 2015-16 one. 16-17, he played a significantly lower role with Booker and Bledsoe getting those minutes, only 21 minutes per night. But he played 36 minutes per night in 15-16 and was a top 40 player. He was a top 40 player the year before that as well, which was his Milwaukee Phoenix season there. He averaged almost 20 points per game in that year, that first full year in Phoenix. But I don't think he's getting anywhere near that level of playing time. I think Booker's going to play with the wings. I also think we're going to see some Shaq Harrison in there, who provides that defensive ability that Booker doesn't, and he can play sort of off-ball offensively and then guard the best guard on that opposing team, whereas a Knight-Booker backcourt would be disastrous defensively. So I think that we should be tempering our minutes expectation for Knight, but he is a fantastic late-round pick. Yahoo's got him ranked 430th. Clearly, that's ludicrous. His ADP is 145. Even that, I think he's fine, but that's what you should be doing. He is the perfect guy to look at with your last pick, because if he plays 32 a night, which I don't think he will, but if he does, then he jumps up and becomes a top 100 guy, and maybe he scores 17 a night and gets you 5.5 to 6 assists and gets a steal and shoots a good free throw percentage. All those things he can do. But he's not going to be that top 40 guy that he was in Milwaukee, or that he was in his first full season in Phoenix, coming off that ACL with the defensive deficiencies and the fact that before his ACL injury, he was pretty shit, and he wasn't really doing much to instill too much confidence in you as a starting point guard. The breakout player you've got listed on this team, Brendon, is Josh Jackson. I am not a massive Josh Jackson fan. I'm sure the people on the always rational and sane Suns subreddit will love me saying this, but I don't really think that Jackson is a great player. I think he takes a lot of dumb shots. I think he takes too many shots. He can pass the ball. We haven't seen massive amounts of that in the NBA. He provides good defense, but I'm not totally in on him, and I think there's a realistic scenario this year where Bridges could actually jump ahead of Jackson in terms of the pecking order and in minutes on this team. But I'll give you the floor. You've listed him as a breakout guy, and I have to be fair to Jackson, because that portion at the end of last season with Warren out and with Booker out, he played pretty well. He did get his efficiency up. He looked better, but then Summer League was it was disgraceful. He was just terrible. He looked like he didn't know what he was doing. He looked like everything he'd gained at the end of last season, he'd forgotten how to do. The shots were bad. He couldn't hit anything. And I have real concerns with his not being able to make shots but still taking them is a bad combination. So, are you taking what we saw from the end of last season from Jackson and extrapolating that into, okay, he's learned those lessons?
I think that is where my optimism comes from, and you'll probably notice talking to me too about just my general optimism on a lot of individual player development stuff that I'm really excited to see. I think Igor Kokoshkov, the way that he's going to run things, just heavy on motion, heavy on ball movement, no one guy controlling the ball, being even given an opportunity to take those kinds of, and you're right, they're really, really awful shots a lot of the time when Jackson has the mandate and the opportunity to just roam around and do whatever he wants to do in the half court. That it goes badly, and he's going to shoot terribly every night when he's given that chance. I just don't think he'll have that opportunity, and that might just be optimism, and that might be all it is. But I don't expect his 3-point percentage to really skyrocket by any means. But I think, you could see his assists start to go up. You could see him becoming a bigger part of the offense in that way. I think he's going to be even better in transition when he's, playing next to better players night to night. The thing to know about that end of the year stretch that he had that earned him the second team all rookie selection he ended up getting is he was that, we've talked about the injuries. He was playing without Booker and Warren for a lot of those games, and he was able to put up counting stats, but I also think he did learn a thing or two about how to get efficient shots and play within himself in the NBA. I wasn't too worried about Summer League. I still tend to think that Jackson is somebody who did grow as a player, as a rookie, and I think just putting Booker or Knight, even Bridges, Ariza, having a center that can actually, play consistent basketball, I think all that stuff will help him restrict those boneheaded decisions and make him a more efficient and productive player.
He played 25 minutes a night last season, was ranked 239th, but I think it's more instructive to see what he did over the post-All-Star period where he was the 130th ranked player, played 31 minutes a night, but the thing to look at there is he had a usage of 28% because he was playing without Booker, because he was playing without Warren, but he was still just the 130th ranked player because he just didn't do much. Look, the percentages were bad. He took 5 free throw attempts per game and hit only 68%. That's a big negative. Didn't hit threes. Almost 6 rebounds and 2.5 assists, and they're okay numbers, but they're nothing spectacular. The steal numbers were really strong from him, 1.5 steals over that time frame, but finding where all these minutes are going to fit in between him and Warren and Ariza and Bridges, it's the tough thing that leaves me a little bit concerned, with him. But he did improve that efficiency. He did shoot better, but still only 26% from 3 over that period too. So that's something that I just don't feel like he's ever going to come and become even close to league average. I think he probably can bump it up a few percentage points, but not necessarily huge amounts. And he's being drafted in that area. Yahoo's ranked him 208th, an ADP of 135th, and he is, like Brendon Knight, absolutely fine to take that flyer on, but the deficiencies in his game, the no threes, the poor percentages from both areas, the low assist numbers, which could easily rise as well, I think that leaves him with a limited upside, plus the competition for minutes. And I'm not a big Josh Jackson fan as a player. And I do think that Bridges could overtake him, but I can also very easily see the scenario you're describing where he does fit into that role, where he becomes a real distributor, defensive type guy who takes more smarter shots and sees the percentage rise. That could easily happen. It's not what I feel is going to happen, but it's one of those ones where I'd be happy to take a flyer on it, see what happens at the end of a draft, and see exactly where he ends up for this coming season. The two-way guy on this team, it's George King. He was the 59th pick in the draft. I don't think he's an NBA caliber player. We saw Alec Peters in that role last year, who came out and had one of the more astounding performances that you would ever see. I think the last game of the season, he is no longer with the team. I think George King could be expected to play a similar role to what Peters did, and by saying that, I mean we just won't see him do anything. So I've wasted way too many seconds talking about George King. But Brendon, Kokoshkov, we mentioned him already. He is the new coach. How does what he bring to the team? Like, what is going to be happening different with this team than what we saw under Earl Watson and Jay Triano last season? More threes, more ball movement, quicker pace. Like, what's the difference that Kokoshkov is likely to bring based on what you've seen from his assistant coach numbers or assistant coach style, I guess, or more importantly, the head coach stuff with Slovenia?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. I mean, he did similar things with the Jazz that he did as the head coach of Slovenia with Goran Dragic and Luka Doncic. But you saw similar things with with Gordon Hayward and with Donovan Mitchell. I think it's hard to tell which individual players will slot into which roles, and that's something that we've been struggling with trying not to do in Phoenix. Is this guy, Josh Jackson will be the Joe Ingles. It's not going to be cookie cutter like that, but I do think it'll be helpful for the overall offense of the team in a massive way, that they would meander from system to strategy to new system, new strategy on a night-to-night basis last year. I think it hurt the efficiency. It hurt the development of the players. So I would imagine that you're going to see a lot of back and forth between Brandon Knight and Devin Booker to start possessions. Some creative stuff just to get the ball into Booker's hands, space the floor, have Ayton rolling to the rim. It's nothing too complicated, but I just think Booker's not a guy who is going to be a Chris Paul pounding the ball for 10 seconds and then initiating a pick and roll and creating an efficient, high caliber offense out of that. He's really going to benefit, and I think the rest of the team by way of that, from having that initial movement. And so, I'm just optimistic for really the team up and down, but especially I think Booker, and like I said before, I think that's part of the reason I'm so optimistic about Jackson. The one thing I would say is that talking about Ayton as a Rookie of the Year candidate or a fantasy player, that is one of the more interesting things, is how will his production be in a system that doesn't feature a center, or will Kukoshkov just adapt completely to having such a talent there that he's never had in any of his other stops?
We'll talk about Ayton in just a sec. I just want to talk about the player most likely to be traded first, because I have a rigid run sheet that I want to get to. I'm only partially joking there.
No
but
problem.
Let's talk about TJ Warren as a player most likely to be traded. But more importantly, Marquise Chris, you've got listed as that guy. We've spoken about Warren already. Chris is a player who I think has been extremely disappointing. It's hard to see someone on the court with probably as less of a feel for the game, someone who just picks up technical fouls or 3 fouls in 5 minutes or makes dumb plays, but also has the incredible athletic gifts. He started to put it together a little bit towards the end of last season. I've been highly critical of Marquise Chris, but he did start to show something towards the end of the season. But Brendon, I feel this season he is going to be way more limited than what we saw last year. He only played 21 minutes per game last season. With the wings, with Trevor Ariza probably playing more at the 4. Chris, I believe, might be shunted into more backup centre minutes, but they just traded for Rashawn Holmes. Tyson Chandler's still around. Yeah, we're going to see a big downturn here for Chris if he hangs around, and are the Suns out on him as a development prospect?
Well, I would say that the moves they made this summer certainly paint the picture of frustration with Chris, or at least uncertainty about what his future will be with the team, or if there is a future for him on the team. It's tough. I mean, you're asking the right questions as far as who plays and when and where. It's a problem on the wing. Maybe not a problem, but it's a question on the wing, and it's a concern at the big man position too. The trade for Rashawn Holmes I liked, because that's an upside play, and he has more of an opportunity to get a role here than he would have in Philadelphia, I think. But then you add Dragan Bender to that mix as well. Somebody I think is a better fit at the center too, and Trevor Ariza is going to play. Be starting for, I imagine. It's a lot of optimistic signs for Marquise Chris. So I'm worried about what that does for him going forward. But even just this year, I worry that it might already be too late, and that's why I put him on the list as somebody who might be traded, or and it's not even a trade for value. He just seems to me like the guy that's going to be a throw to some deal down the road, just because I don't think that there's a dedication to him within the organization.
Yeah, look, he's a guy that, I've said this all the time. Look, if he played 30 minutes a night, he'd be a top 70 fantasy guy, because he blocks shots, he can hit threes, he can rebound okay, he can score, he can get efficiency from the field, he can get steals. But He's just not good enough to actually get on the court to get those minutes to happen. He's not smart enough to stay on the court, to stay out of foul trouble. He is the most frustrating player in that regard, and I'm sure Suns fans are well aware of his shortcomings in that area. But let's now transition into Deandre Ayton, the number one overall pick. One of the more positive things I think that came out of the offseason, I was all aboard the Suns picking Luka Doncic at number one. That clearly didn't happen. I thought there was some weird thought processes involved in that between McDonough and Robert Sava, and some of the things. I've been critical of the Suns front office. Everyone's aware of that, but in terms of Kokoshkov talking about Ayton, and the thing that stood out to me said, well, he's a center. He's only going to play center. He's not playing power forward. Now, people look at, and a lot of the defense of DeAndre Ayton comes, he had to play out of position at Arizona. But one thing that I think doesn't get mentioned enough is that part of the reason that DeAndre Ayton wanted to go to Arizona is because he wanted to play at power forward, and he kept talking about himself as a power forward. But the good thing is that Kokoshkov's come out and said, well, no, mate, look, you're not. You're a center, and that is good for his value. Now, I think that I'm not massive on drafting rookies generally in fantasy, but he is ranked ludicrously low on Yahoo at 130th. He's got an ADP of 81. I think he could smash both of those numbers. I think he's going to come out and play big minutes. I think he's going to score. He's going to do it efficiently. He shoots free throws. The assists won't be great. He'll block shots. They won't be fantastic. They're going to be behind probably guys like Jaren Jackson and Wendell Carter. But he's going to get the minutes. He's going to get the opportunity. And I think he's a really solid mid-round pick in fantasy. Now, in terms of his long-term production, I still have my concerns. And you've already highlighted one in terms of Kokoshkov's system not really involving centers. And I think that'll make him maybe the fourth or fifth highest guy on this team in terms of usage. But his efficiency will enable him to score. I do think that he is the favourite for Rookie of the Year, but let's talk about what did you think about the draft pick at first, and how have you changed your opinion on it, and what sort of expectations do you have for DeAndre starting this season?
Yeah, I was a guy who wanted Luka Doncic for the Suns, but you can't watch him be overly worried. I don't think. I really did turn around on it. Like, I just think Ayton he actually makes sense. Watching him in Summer League and hearing the conversations that the front office and the coaching staff are having about what he'll be, I just can't help but be optimistic comparing it to what the center position has been for the Suns. I'm really excited to see how it goes, and I think he's going to be an efficient player right away as a scorer. He's going to rebound. That stuff just hasn't been around for us, and that's part of the reason generally that I'm optimistic about the offense. But, I mean, the concerns are obvious too, just like the talent is. He's not going to be an elite rim protector. It doesn't really seem likely that he ever gets to that point. There's concerns up and down his skill set. So, he's going to be divisive, I think, right away, but I think he'll also be pretty productive right away.
I've said this about him plenty of times, and I always get into this, because he played in Arizona, their scheme didn't allow it. He played power forward. That's why he couldn't get block numbers. But there are clear ways to dispute this. Jaren Jackson Jr. played at power forward in Michigan, and he had one of the highest block rates we've seen in recent memory. Players coming out of Arizona in the past, Larry Markkinen, Rondé Hollis-Jefferson, Aaron Gordon, who played in those big positions, who played at power forward, they had really low defensive steal and block rates, and they came to the NBA, and guess what? They still have really low steal and block rates. It hasn't been like, it's just Arizona's system holding them back. Now, if it was a Kentucky type of situation like we've seen with Devin Booker, their system holds players back. Devin Booker wasn't able to do what he can do in the NBA at Kentucky. We've seen it with Towns and Trey Lyles and plenty of other guys who have escaped my memory. Maybe it's going to be Kevin Knox. Maybe it's going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. That's fine. But these Arizona guys who came in with defensive deficiencies, with low steal and block rates, it's been the same for them heading into the NBA. And I think that can be a concern with Ayton. That's why I think that his overall long-term upside is lower than Jackson and Doncic and probably Wendell Carter as well. But for this season, I think he's going to be the number one rookie because of opportunity, because the lack of defense isn't going to keep him off the floor in this season, whereas as the team starts to get better, that might become a concern. I don't think it will be, and I think he'll be getting these big minutes from day one, and it won't really change too much as the season progresses, and that's exactly what we're looking for in a fantasy guy. Bridges was selected by the Sixers, and then there was that trade. I was critical of giving up that that first round pick, which looked like it might be in the first season, that high school kids would be able to come out, meaning it's almost like a double draft. But it appears that high school date might be pushed forward or pushed back a year, so that might not be as bad in terms of the value they gave up. But I don't want to talk too much about that. I want to talk about what Bridges is as a player, a guy that can come in and knock down threes straight away, that can play pretty solid defense and has a strong steal rate, a strong block rate, and goes out there and does what he needs to do. I don't think he's necessarily going to be too much of a fantasy asset because of all the other guys we've talked about who play that position. But as I've already stated, I think he could put himself ahead of Jackson in the pecking order at some point this season. And he seems like the perfect complement, Brendon, to someone like Ayton and to Devin Booker.
Yeah, I think you're right about, from a fantasy perspective, I would imagine the only way he really becomes relevant is if he does surpass Josh Jackson. But I agree with your general sentiment, even though I am optimistic that Josh Jackson figures it out and becomes a more productive and consistent player this year. I think there's certainly a potential for Bridges to come in and start playing over and above him pretty early in the year. I think he's going to make shots right away. I can't imagine a world in which somebody who is that amazing of a shooter and such a versatile shooter, getting shots up with guys in his face and in transition, really awkward angles, and he's an amazing shooter, and I think he will be that in the NBA too. So, and then like you mentioned, the counting stats for defense are pretty solid for him.
Yep.
I think he might struggle defensively too. From a individual perspective, I think he could get lit up a little bit from time to time, but again, I don't imagine that to really be to hamper his playing time on a team like this. So I think he'll play a decent amount, and I think he'll get a lot of threes. I mean, open threes if he's playing in the right lineups.
This is a 1-1 sort of a player, and Brendon, for those, if you don't know what that means, it means a guy that can average at some point in his career a 3, a steal, and a block per game. He can be that guy. Sure. Think of maybe a bigger type Josh Richardson in Miami, a guy that can do that in those small forward shooting guard type bodies. Bridges can be that guy. We know how valuable that can be, and if he does establish himself as that third guy alongside Ayton and Booker, his usage goes up, his free throw rate goes up, which is great with his percentage. Maybe he at some point, peak in his career is averaging a block, 1.5 steals, and 2.5 threes with 14 points, and that's really valuable. That's where he can get to at some point in his career. So I do really like him long term, but I think it's going to be hard for him to make a massive impact this season, as he will be quite low usage, and fighting for those minutes is going to be the tough thing there. The other guy who I do really like, and I love that the Suns got him at 31, I thought he was probably a top 20 player in this class, and that is Alia Cobo. I said at some point in the post-draft process that I thought that there is a chance that he will start games for the Suns this season. It is only night. It is really only Shaq Harrison or those Devin Booker lineups that are in the way of a Cobo. He showed a really strong scoring mentality over in France. He can hit the three. He's long. He can play defense. I really like what a Cobo can do, but the way that they sort of shielded him in Summer League had me a little bit concerned as to how they're going to use him. Is he currently, you think, sitting third on that point guard depth chart behind Knight and Harrison?
I think he might even, maybe right now, but I would think after camp, if he looks ready, which, coming from a decently non-competitive foreign league and even having concerns as a prospect in that league, maybe he doesn't get ready right away. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if he started at some point in the year either. I think we're really excited to get him. They had talked before the draft about not looking to roster 4 rookies, and I think his availability at 1 for them changed the calculus of the draft. They liked him that much. To get younger again for the, who knows how many consecutive seasons. And to speak to Summer League, I would say that he did have, I think, a little bit of an injury concern. I can't remember what the injury was, but he started playing a lot less in their second, third, fourth games. That was more of an injury thing than anything else. He hit that wild 3-point opening game against the Mavericks and was pretty exciting as a player that night, and then we never really heard from him again. But I wouldn't be too concerned about that.
Your projected starting 5 for this team, you've got Brandon Knight, Devin Booker, Josh Jackson, Trevor Ariza, and DeAndre Ayton. We've talked about 4 of those blokes. Let's talk about the 5th one of those, and that is Trevor Ariza. Comes over on that 1-year, $15 million deal from the Houston Rockets. He is a guy that many people will look at. And I've had this question many times tweeted to me. What do you think of Trevor Ariza's fantasy value for this season? He goes to a really good team. He goes from a good team to a bad team. He's going to have all these opportunities. I just don't really rate Trevor Booker as a fantasy guy. He did play 34 minutes per game last season. That could very comfortably go down as they don't need to push, and it isn't Mike D'Antoni coaching these Suns anymore, so those minutes could come down. His efficiency dropped off. He's going to be taking harder looks without James Harden and Chris Paul setting him up. So I think that 41% field goal and 37% from three, they could both come down. His steal rate has plummeted over the last couple of seasons. 2 years ago, he was a guy that was getting 2 steals per 36 down to 1.6 last year, and that might not seem like a huge drop down, but we are talking about that's a 20% fall in that steal rate, and that has a big impact on his value. As I said, 87th last year, but in the last 3 months of last year, the 142nd ranked player, as he just wasn't able to do anything. He doesn't rebound, he doesn't get assists, his scoring is low, and I don't really see massive amounts changing for Ariza. Fine, you want to take him as a last pick. Maybe he's a top 120 player, but I'd see absolutely no upside in him actually jumping forward. And I think that given his age, because he's not a young player, he is 33 years of age, I believe, at the moment. 33. That some of this stuff probably doesn't come back. What did you think of the signing as a whole, and is his role fairly steady on this team?
I thought it was a fine flyer for 1 year. I mean, I just feel like you can't really get too down on a team for trying something for 1 year. I think that they could have maybe gotten a couple players with that money and a little bit of a run at a deeper, more well-rounded roster if they really wanted to compete. But they convinced themselves this guy will matter on the court and in the clubhouse or in the locker room. And I think I would imagine he's using a pretty similar role. I can't imagine anything really changing. I mean, I think you're right about the minutes. He has no need to be playing as much as he was. They're not going to be, pushing for 65 wins in Phoenix this year. And we talked about all the guys that are kind of pushing for playing time as well. And he's maybe not even on the roster by the end of the year. I think he could be a great guy as somebody who goes to a competing team and helps them. But I mean, he'll just, he'll shoot spot up threes, switch on defense. I think he'll they're the best one-on-one defender. So maybe the steals do have a little bit up there just because he will be kind of sick on the top scorer every night, which he might not have always been, switching scheme with Houston last year. But yeah, I think it's going to be more the same. I think he'll help the Suns, but he's never been a guy who's a 20-point scorer or anything like that. I think that changes at age 33 season.
Two more guys I want to talk about here. One of them is Dragan Bender, who I've always said I think Bender is a better basketball player than Marquise Chris, but the Suns in the past had always seemed to rely upon Chris more than Bender. That changed a little bit last season, but if we want to talk disastrous summer leagues, Dragan Bender had one of those as well. He just looks like he's never going to be a guy that puts up big statistical numbers. I've said this about him ad nauseum, that he might play well and he might be a positive contributor at times on the court, but the stats will never be there, and he's not a great fantasy option there. But I was really concerned with what he did in Summer League. He's clearly going to be losing minutes this season. He played 25 minutes a game last season, but with Ariza, with Ayton coming in, I think it's going to be hard for him to get back to that. Do you think that Bender, who played every game last season, do you think that he is actually an every night part of this rotation?
I think he will be. I would say right now, to me, he's the favorite to play as the primary backup center. That's sort of how I see it stacking up as of now, and having not seen anything on the court. But I think Tyson Chandler really won't play at all. I can't, blowouts and injury stuff, but he won't be a part of the rotation. So I think it's really going to be a competition. We already talked about Marquise Chris and how I feel about him. I think it'll be more than anything a competition between Bender and Holmes backup 5 spot, and then can kind of slide over to the 4 with his shooting. So he'll be a tonight player again. I don't know if he quite gets to 25 minutes, considering he started 37 games as well last year. But I do think he'll play. I think he'll be on the floor. I think he's a guy that Kukoshkov, again, will, maybe more than anyone else, have a positive impact on. I think that's the hope, at least, is if Igor can't figure out how to properly use Bender and unleash what his kind of interesting skills, then probably no one can. But I think he'll get that chance this year that he can improve.
I do. I like what he can do. I like how he can move the ball. I like how he can defend. But he's just got to be able to provide something offensively. And as I've said, he just doesn't put up fantasy numbers. So no matter what his role is, he's going to be limited to a really, really deep league sort of a guy. And yeah, I don't think there's too much offensive upside there. It's interesting what you say there about Tyson Chandler, though. If you don't think he's going to play at all, he probably is the better option between Bender, Chris. Between him, Bender, and Chris as the backup center, but it doesn't mean that he necessarily gets that playing time. They've always played him at the start of the season and then sat him at the end of the year. But you just think it's going to be, well, we're just going to sit you out for the whole season and have you as basically just an emergency in case one of these guys goes down.
I think so. I kind of have a feeling this might be the last season of his career. He was spending a lot of time in California last year. He has a mother aging over there. I just think his career is winding down. He knows what his role is in the locker room more than anything, and I think he might even be a buyout guy by the end of the year. He really does want to, take another whack at winning a championship somewhere across the league, fill in some depth for a championship contender by the end of the season. But I just, I'm sure he'll play here and there. I'm not necessarily sold that he plays 0 games as a Sun this year, but I think there's going to be an emphasis on some of the guys ahead of him in the rotation, for better or worse.
The last position I want to talk about, actually we'll get to that in a sec. Just mentioning a couple of value guys for fantasy. I think Ayton has tremendous value. I think TJ Warren's probably on the bust side of things, and as I've already mentioned, Brendon Knight and Josh Jackson are really strong late round picks to try and take a flyer on. But I'm pretty big on Deandre Ayton. I think he is going to be the best rookie this season and probably a chance to be a top 50 guy. The last situation I want to talk about is the Troy Daniels, Davon Reed scenario. I think that Daniels personally is probably fighting and won't be an every night guy. And I think that the Suns, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Brendon, I think the Suns would want Reed to move into that backup shooting guard role. He missed nearly all of last season with a knee injury, came back at the end and showed some signs. He had a pretty strong summer league, and I think that they'd want to try and develop him in that role. Is that how you see that playing out, or are we going to see more of the Troy Daniels show?
No, I think you're definitely right. The fact that they made a commitment to Davon Reed, kept him when it was possible to move on, drafted him, kind of reached for him last in the 2017 draft, and didn't see much from him last year. I think that he's going to have an opportunity. I think you could even see in a lot of those lineups we talked about, if Booker's the guard, or even if he's not, I think you could see Josh Jackson or Mikael Bridges even kind of fill that nominal second wing spot and be the shooting presence there. Troy Daniels was a disaster last year. He made a lot of threes for the Suns, and he helped them in that regard when they had no one else. But he plays no defense, can't move the ball, can't even really handle the ball. He gets it taken from him. If they're playing him, I think that's going to be a disaster to put it kind of rudely.
No, I agree. He's not that good. He shoots threes. He doesn't do anything else. And Reed was terrible in terms of what he did on the court last season. 21 games, shot 29% from the field and from three. Couldn't really contribute in other areas. The steal rate for him was pretty encouraging, so that's nice. And I think that shooting will come up. He was a pretty strong three-point shooter in college, and I do believe that he'll be playing a larger role. Too. What was that, sorry?
Summer League too, Reed did.
Yeah, he did look a lot better then. I do think he moves into that backup role behind Devin Booker and becomes more of an every night part of the rotation, replacing Daniel. So that's something to pay attention to for deep leagues. And I do think he has some decently high upside, at least to push himself maybe into some sort of a sixth man role, or in a situation where he does play alongside Devin Booker in a larger type role, as you've already mentioned. So he is someone to pay some attention to, the 32nd pick in the 2017 NBA draft. Brendon, that'll do it for the Suns. I think we covered most of what needs to be talked about, if not all, with this team. Can you give everyone, first of all, your Twitter handle, and secondly, what you guys are doing over on Locked On Suns at the moment?
Yeah, my Twitter is at BrendonKleen14. Like Josh mentioned, I'm the host of Locked On Suns. We did a positional preview, and then wings, bigs, and guards. Now we're kind of interviewing people around the local media, getting their perspective on things, how they think it'll shake out. So some interesting perspective from some different voices as we get ready for training camp.
Go check out Brendon on Twitter. Go check out Locked On Suns. Give both of our podcasts a subscribe. Give it a 5-star rating. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and this show is also on YouTube. Give me a thumbs up. Leave a comment. You know the drill. Go follow us on Twitter. Thank you, Brendon, once again for jumping on and previewing the Phoenix Suns.
Thanks. It was my pleasure.
Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Davon Reed.